Greetings! In this video I'll be painting an Assault Intercessor from the Red Wolves chapter. I used some of the new Space Wolves kits to make this one, including the use of the Blackmane's Great Company Armorial, as the Red Wolves share the same basic design. There's next to no lore in this chapter, but I figured it'd be okay to keep the wolf-styled aesthetics. The loadout for this mini more suits a Grey Hunter, but as the Red Wolves are shown with Codex tactical markings, and both the Grey Hunters and Blood Claws of the Space Wolves are more melee oriented, I figured the role of Assault Intercessor is close enough. After I was happy with the assembly, I primed the model black through my airbrush. For each of my videos I put a list of paints in the video description, including some alternative choices which may better suit your situation. The Red Wolves are, well, red, but I've done red a few times now and I wanted to try a different approach. I've started with a base coat of Wordbearer's Red, doing a number of thin coats to get smooth yet full coverage. The field of the pauldrons is black, so I've not bothered to paint those bits red, but I did paint the chapter armorial in as well. Next I went in with Mephiston Red, painting over the most exposed surfaces, places where I'd figured the light would reach easiest, and places where I wanted them to stand out. Whilst I painted over pretty much every section with some Mephiston Red, I made sure to leave the previously applied Wordbearer's Red in the areas where I wanted them to appear in shadow. When you see the full model after this pass, it looks like there's a faint dark red recess shade, and whilst panel lining with a red wash can do that, it can't really do the cylindrical armour sections in the way I was trying this time around. Before going too bright with the red, I decided to paint in the black details with Abaddon black. This way, if I go over the red, it's not as difficult to recover, but also later steps are going to be easier to reach than, say, the undersuit. Back to the red, using Evil Sunz Scarlet this time. Like the Mephiston Red, I applied this over the sections where I wanted to be in the most light, just in a smaller area. I was aware I had to keep a transition between this paint and the previous two reds, and I think I managed to get it to balance fairly well. Thinning the paint is key for this kind of effect. Leaving the red for a while, moving over to highlighting the black, starting with Dark Reaper. This was applied over the chainsword and bolt carbine, doing a very rough edge highlight, not caring about spilling over as I wanted the weapons to look like they've been through some serious battle. I also base coated the chainsword grip with this colour. To highlight the chainsword grip, I used some Thunderhawk blue, picking out the raised bits and leaving the recesses. Onto the leather now, starting with a base coat of Rhinox hide. This covers the belt, the holster, and all of the other little details hanging from the belt, greave, and pauldron. So not just the leather details. Next I use some Skrag brown to apply the first layer of detailing to the leather bits. The holster is the clearest example for me to show this. I start by painting in some defined edges and then do some light scratch applications. With some fairly thinned paint, I try for a bit of a gradient between the two. I use Deathclaw brown to do the final pass, applying scratchy marks around the surface to emphasise the previous pass. There's this little rune here, so I use Mechanicus standard grey as a base coat. I'm going for the generic grey stone effect. The next layer was done with Dawnstone, over most of the exposed surfaces of the rune. Finally, Administratum grey was used to dot on some rough edge highlights to give it some texture. There are some teeth hanging around the model, so I used some Zandri dust as a base coat for these. Ushabti bone was used for the next layer, applied similarly to the Dawnstone for the rune. Screaming Skull was last, used as a thin line along each tooth as well as a few little dots to add some texture. Next I used some Steel Legion drab to base coat the rock and paint in the wolf tail decoration. I normally do the base last, off camera, but as I'm using the same colours, I figured it'd be simpler to do it now. Baneblade brown was next, applied along the string sections on the greave and pauldron, as well as forming the main layering pass for the rock on the base. I switched to a smaller brush to get the strings to highlight nicely. I also highlighted the raised sections of the fur on the wolf tail. Lastly for these bits was Rakarth flesh, applied as a rough highlight to all the bits that I used Baneblade brown on: strings, the wolf tail, and the rock. Onto the eye lenses, starting with a base coat of Warpstone Glow. Moot green followed, applied over most of the eye lens but leaving the edges. Dorn yellow was next, doing an even smaller section for the main glow. I didn't do this part very well, so I went back in with Moot green to clean up a little. Now going back to the red armour again, using some Wild Rider red for some edge highlights and little battle damage effects by dotting the brush along the edges and along some of the flat surfaces. Some more precise cuts were carefully painted in as well. I also tried to paint in some of the runes on the weapons as well, but I'm not very happy with the result. To further emphasise the battle damage from the previous step, I used some Stormvermin fur to paint over some of the larger chunks of the Wild Rider red, which can happen with the quick and rough approach that I use with the red. Going in and carefully picking a section out leaves the Wild Rider red as a highlight for the battle damage effect, as if the paint had chipped away, showing an in-universe undercoat. Now finally onto the metallics, starting with gold details using Retributor armour. The Imperialis on the torso was painted in, as well as the chainsword guard and pommel, the cap of the wolf tail accessory, and the pin on the holster. For the silver details I used gunmetal grey, painting in the chainsaw blade and housing, the bolt carbine chassis, and details around the armour itself. The paint list in the video description shows Citadel alternatives for this and the following paint. I just prefer the smooth application that I get from the metal colour range. To highlight the gunmetal grey, I used some duraluminum, painting in any rivets around the model as well as a simple edge highlight and applying some scratches for added definition. Now onto the markings. I used some gloss varnish, hand painted over the left pollen and right pauldron, in preparation for decals. After they were dry, I applied a low Gothic 3 decal on the knee, signifying 3rd Company, and a close support tactical marking on the pauldron. After the decals were fully set, I returned to Evil Sunz Scarlet and hand painted a low Gothic 3 numeral over the close support tactical marking, matching the references which show red squad ordinals. Finally, I applied some black enamel paneliner around the model, to add some needed shadows in those recessed areas. I went with black instead of sepia as I didn't want the red getting filtered towards a brown red. The black is fairly neutral by comparison, but doesn't work on adding any earthen dusty effects. I used a cotton tip with some enamel thinners to clean away areas that were too messy for my liking, careful not to press too hard to avoid paint tearing away. It's unlikely, but just be careful. After a few hours, the enamel had fully dried and I applied my usual basing method. I painted the base room black and then sealed everything in with some ultramatte varnish. And here we have it! An Assault Intercessor from the Red Wolves chapter. I think this one came out really nice, especially the new method that I tried with the red. The transition between the colours handles well even after the weathering passes, and the black and silver details work well to contrast against the otherwise single tone scheme. I'm also happy with the freehand numeral I did for the tactical marking, as well as the Space Wolves details around the rest of the model. They work together nicely, and I think this chapter could be a good choice for someone who wants a Space Wolves army for the rules or kits, but doesn't want to paint Space Wolves themselves. Being able to use the existing sculpted black mane pauldrons is a good bonus as well. Though you could also use the Horus Heresy Space Wolves transfers, if you don't mind the wolf head being a little bit different. There are two things I didn't like with this paint job though. The red rune markings on the weapons and how dark the panel lining is. For the runes, well, I'm not sure. I think I have to work on painting bright colours in recessed areas, as I'm used to doing the opposite. As for the black panel lines, I could instead use the black of the black and silver bits and use a dark red acrylic wash over the red, but that sort of decision needs to be made before the later steps in the highlighting process, so you can clean up where you don't want the acrylic wash to be. It's not something I can tack on at the end like the enamel. Something to consider, I guess. But anyway, that's all I've got for this video. I hope you stick around for the next one.